Hey, this is EAllen here, EAllen Guitars. I just want to show you today a little bit of filling a crack in a great, gorgeous piece of walnut, figured walnut, and filling it with epoxy. And this is a crack that goes all the way through, and I'll just show you here. This goes all the way through, and what I've started with is I have tape, as you can see, packing tape on the back side, because I'm going to lay this down, but I still want to be able to have the opportunity to see through that I get to the other side if I pick it up and look under it. And so what I'm doing right now, you'll see the heat lamp. It's just your typical halogen bulb that is, 500 watt halogen bulb. But as you know, if you've used them, they put off some heat. And so one of the things that brings success in my experience with epoxy is that if you heat the wood, it expands the pores of the wood, and as well as warming the epoxy itself, it actually thins it a little bit. And I'm just using some Bob Smith Industries. These are just a couple small bottles I like to keep around because they're easy to dispense out of rather than a big bottle for me. And so it's just an opportunity to kind of heat that up with that light for 10 minutes or so and get it nice and warm, expand the pores in the wood where that's going to go. I've taped it off because walnut is an open grain wood, meaning that it can soak into a lot of areas that epoxy can, and I don't want it to get in all areas. I just wanted to get it mainly in that crack, and so I don't want to accidentally smear any off. And so after that heats up for a little bit here, we'll get to the next stage. So I have my epoxy here, and one of the things that I've found over time for epoxy, it's just kind of my quirkinesses, but I have best luck by actually counting how much time, because the little markings that are on these epoxy bottles, on any of them, no matter what size, the epoxy is hard to tell. It's so thick that you can turn the bottle upside down and think you've got the right amount, but then you look 5 minutes later and the level in the bottle has raised 2 marks on you. And so I actually count them in my head as I'm going, how much is coming out. And so here goes counting in my head to actually count how much to put in there. And so I'll do the same thing here if you'll bear with me. So we've got hopefully about the same amounts in there. I'll probably do more than one pour. I know I actually will. And by the way, I'm using Bob Smith Industries. It's a slow cure epoxy. I don't like fast cure. It says 30 minutes cure, but it actually will take quite a while to cure out and be ready to use again. You want slow cure because it will seep down in longer before it starts hardening up. This is the way I'm going to tint it. It's called trans tint dye. It's a metallicized dye, meaning it's UV resisted. Now they make powdered dyes, and I use those. Alanine dye is a great simple powder dye that you can mix in. Works great in epoxy. And the negative about that is it's not UV resistant and it can really fade over time. I've also learned not to use the dropper on the tip of the dye because it just doesn't come out well. So I use these little scientific little things, and I drop out that way. And so I put about 6 drops in there, and that will be plenty. And I also have learned the hard way to always put the lid back on the dye immediately after use, because I can't tell you how many times I've accidentally knocked the dye over. So I'm going to mix this, and it takes quite a bit of time. You need to really mix epoxy up, stir it quite a bit. And so, it's one of those things they tell you 2 minutes or whatever to stir epoxy to make sure it's thoroughly mixed. And I may not get that much time here, but I'm going to mix this for a little bit and then we'll pick up after that. Now, if you look, you can see it is black from those 5 drops, which is probably even more dye than I needed in it. But something that I always like more than not enough, and just to get me started on it. And you can always mix more epoxy in later or whatever. But I'm going to go ahead and just kind of pour this in, and it's still a little thick. I didn't overheat this at all. And pour it right into that crack, and it's going to soak in there pretty good. There's some outlying crack areas here too, where just really fine cracks, and honestly, if those don't fill in totally, This time around, I'll pick them up the next, and I'll even use CA glue in those, because they will take CA glue sometimes that's a little thinner and soak down into those really fine cracks a little more so. But this is just for this big crack as a primer. You can see I'm not used to holding things and being out of the way while I use the video camera. So I'm trying to do that, which means I'm sloppier than normal in what I do. And I'm going to go ahead and walk over and get a spatula for this and kind of rake that in here with something flat. I'm going to kind of just spread that in. This is just a block of whatever I have laying around. I'm not particular of it. I'll wipe it off when it's done, so it doesn't really matter. But this is gonna just kind of soak down in there, and this will be the first. I'm guessing I'll take 2 pours to fill this crack in and be able to see that. Now, I use CA glue a lot. If you watch me do it at times, or my pictures and things on my feed, you'll notice that I use CA a lot. I love CA with the different thicknesses and accelerators and stuff that's out there, but it's just not meant for this thick of a pour. CA glue is super glue, by the way, and you would think super glue is instant, but when it gets to really thick, it lets off not only a lot of heat, but it also has a tendency to really take a long time to cure when you get large amounts of it. And the gas that it puts off is noxious, in the sense of it will burn your eyes terribly. And epoxy is just much more user-friendly and also easier on your respiratory and your eyes because it doesn't let off the fumes at a heavy rate. And so that's the start of my first pour that I'm going to do on this epoxy fill of this crack. And this, by using slow cure epoxy, so slower cure tends to be that. Now, they are formulated different. It's different than, for instance, the surface epoxy that you might use for big pours and things that take 72 hours. I have some here that take 72 hours for deep pours to cure out. And that's a different kind of epoxy. It self-levels, and it's not meant to just fill cracks really necessarily. Okay, so I've got my second pour done in here, and I'm letting it cure out, and it might be hard to see. I've got a light on it, the heat lamp back on it, the halogen bulb, but you'll see that some bubbles are rising up to the top, and so I'm just going to let that happen. It's bubbles working out of it, and I overfilled this. And I overfilled it because it's going to shrink, and it can, you'll be surprised that it can open up a crevice as it sets there in the wood, or drip through a crevice, and next thing you know, it actually needs more by the time it's all dried out. And so a little bit of process, but also removing the tape. I learned to remove the tape before it cures. I like to do it pretty soon, and the reason why is because it's a pain sometimes to sand the tape off more than it is to sand the epoxy off. So I'm ready to level this. I'm going to start with some 80 grit. This body has not been sanded. It's just been run to the planer yet. So I'm going to start with some 80 grit and knock this down. Then I'll go on up to 120 and probably leave it at that for now until I get ready to do the actual finish stage. So the 80 grit's going to go on the random orbital sander here, and I'm going to kick on, and we're going to knock this out real quick. So our sanding is done, at least for now, and you can tell I use a block sander as well. I've got 2 grits on it, and 120 and also a 220 on it. I'll go back over this again to make sure that there's no waviness in this body at all, and then to get finished off with 220. So, but there are some little fine cracks that are here that are left, and that's okay. I'm actually going to go ahead with that, and I'm just going to fill that in with the black CA. And the reason why is the black CA, this is a medium thick, but it's still quite thin compared to epoxy, and so it has the ability to really absorb down into those cracks better, and that's what I'm after, to hold it, to make sure it never does crack in the future. And I don't have any worry about it. I've never had one do that. So that's kind of the stage it's at right now, and getting ready to just layer some more of this on, and it's an easy do. I do have some little micro tips and stuff that I use a lot of times, but I'm not too worried about it. Just layering it into these little crack areas, and it will actually disappear in those cracks as it tries to fill them in, and it will fill them in, but it will disappear as it just soaks down into any of the crevices that are left over. And so it will take several layers of this. You can shortcut that a little bit, which I do periodically if it's not a deep crack. If it's just a surface imperfection, you can shortcut that with some accelerator spray like this. Now, I don't want to do that when there's a crack, though. I actually want to let it soak all the way down into the crack and bind that together so that it fully fills that area, to remove the possibility of it doing so later. So next I will just be sanding off any that is left, and any excess left, and we'll see how that looks when that's done. We're just going to wipe over real quick with some naphtha, just to kind of get an idea of what this fill is going to look like. This is the back of the guitar, unless I were to make it into a left-handed. And but you can see just the figure on this piece of wood is just gorgeous. And the crack is character. It will also be pickups and things like that to go there, so you really won't see much besides the corners maybe sticking out from underneath the pickup ring. And this is all done. So to see what is it used to complete this whole thing is really some slow cure epoxy from Bob Smith Industries and Starbond super glue, or CA glue. And that's all that's done besides the sandpaper and naphtha to wipe it down with. But that gives you an idea of what it takes to fill a crevice and use the character that's already there from what nature did to really make it stand out and be a beautiful piece when it's done. Let me know if you have questions, and love to see how I can answer them. That's all for now. Enjoy.